They tried to cover it up, they thought no one would notice, but now it's blowing up in their faces. Because Blake Lively's legal team just made a move. So shady, so reckless that it backfired instantly, and what's worse, it didn't just backfire. It triggered something they never saw coming, a consequence so severe that people close to the case are calling it irreversible. And here's the kicker, it could cost her everything, her reputation, her leverage, and maybe even her freedom. This is the beginning of the end for Blake Lively, and Starscope has the exclusive inside story of how it all spiraled out of control. So it all started quietly behind closed doors, when Blake Lively's legal team decided to take what they believed was a tactical shortcut, something that wouldn't be questioned, something that would fly under the radar and tighten their grip on a case that was already wobbling from the weight of growing public scrutiny and endless online backlash. But what they didn't realize was that this so-called shortcut would become the very thing that unraveled months of carefully built strategy and exposed cracks in a defense that was already being whispered about in industry circles. Now from the outside, it might have looked like just another filing, just another legal motion in a high-profile case that had already seen its fair share of drama, but behind the scenes, people were watching closely. What they saw sent alarm bells ringing, because this wasn't just a bold move, it was reckless, it was desperate, and it signaled that something inside Team Lively was falling apart. We're talking about a last-minute submission, intentionally withheld evidence, and a legal loophole that they tried to exploit to stop proceedings just long enough to reshape public narrative and shift blame away from their star client. But what they didn't count on was the digital paper trail, the email metadata, the timestamps, and the quietly coordinated responses from content creators who had been building their own case in silence. And when it all came together, when the timeline was exposed, when the connection between the withheld evidence and Blake's previous contradictory statements became crystal clear, the internet exploded. The hashtag #ShadyBlake trend began spreading like wildfire across TikTok and X, formerly known as Twitter, and what started as speculation quickly turned into evidence-based outrage. Screenshots of filings, recordings of past interviews, side-by-side comparisons that showed beyond doubt that someone somewhere in Blake Lively's team had either lied, misled, or manipulated the FIA system to protect her. But the real turning point came when a former legal consultant who once briefly worked with the team stepped forward in an anonymous Reddit AMA, revealing that certain documents had been flagged as problematic internally but were still pushed forward under immense pressure to keep the case timeline in Blake's favor. This revelation alone cracked the case wide open, and suddenly questions turned into accusations, and those accusations began gaining traction in mainstream media. News anchors who once praised Blake's grace under fire were now calling her legal strategy a ticking time bomb, and it wasn't long before legal experts started weighing in on morning panels, explaining in clear language how what seemed like a minor tactic was actually a breach of good faith in civil litigation. Worse yet, the opposition's legal team, led by Justin Baldoni's formidable attorneys, wasted no time. They immediately filed a counter motion, citing intentional delay tactics and requesting sanctions, including fines, and a motion to compel full document transparency. Within 48 hours, a judge ordered an emergency hearing, and what happened in that courtroom was unlike anything seen in a celebrity defamation case in recent memory, because instead of the calm, confident, poised Blake's side had been projecting for months, what unfolded was panic, last-minute redactions, crumbling justifications, and a visibly shaken junior attorney who couldn't answer why key messages between Blake and a third-party influencer were withheld for over 4 months. It was embarrassing, it was public, and worst of all, it was documented on livestream, viewed by over 3 million people and shared across creator communities who had long suspected that something shady was happening behind the curtain. And now they had proof, and Starscope was right there reporting it all in real time, from the failed objections to the visibly fuming judge who interrupted proceedings to ask whether this was a case of incompetence or calculated deception. It was a moment where the narrative flipped, where public sympathy that Blake had so expertly cultivated for years began to melt under the heat of real evidence and raw accountability. And even though her team tried to spin it, even though PR reps began issuing vague statements about misunderstanding and procedural oversight, the damage was done. Creators with influence, audiences in the millions, began calling for a full audit of the case, demanding justice not just for Justin Baldoni but for every creator who had been silenced or sidelined by what they now believed was a coordinated campaign led by Team Lively. And the implications of that are massive, because this isn't just about one lawsuit anymore, it's about the ecosystem of influence It's about what happens when someone with power and connections tries to bend the legal system to their will and gets caught. It's about creators standing up not just in court but on camera, across platforms, across countries, unified in the call for truth. And now the legal landscape is shifting. Judges are watching more closely. Press is digging deeper, and Blake Lively, the once untouchable Hollywood darling, is now the subject of investigations that go far beyond this one case. And that's just the beginning, because what comes next is even more devastating, and in part 2 we'll break down the ripple effect of celebrity reactions, the unsealed testimonies, and the one whistleblower who just came forward with receipts that could destroy everything Team Lively has been trying to protect. And just when everyone thought Blake Lively had escaped the storm with nothing more than a bruised reputation, everything unraveled faster than anyone could have predicted, because this wasn't just about one shady move or one questionable court filing. This was about a disturbing pattern of manipulation, deflection, and coordinated legal aggression that had now reached a boiling point. Behind the polished image and picture-perfect moments was a truth so volatile that it began to shake even her most powerful supporters. And Starscope has now learned that what happened inside that confidential strategy session 2 weeks ago wasn't just a misstep, it was a warning shot, because sources close to the case confirmed that a high-level legal consultant who once advised Lively's team has now quietly removed himself from all further proceedings, citing, quote, irreconcilable ethical concerns. And that statement alone sent shockwaves through the legal community, the kind of thing that forces even seasoned attorneys to take a second look at who they're representing and why. What were these ethical concerns? Why now? And most importantly, would it change the answer? According to one internal memo, we reviewed lies in a series of coordinated subpoenas served on smaller creators, the kind of creators who don't have the legal firepower to fight back, who were allegedly targeted as part of a broader strategy to silence commentary and erase public scrutiny. But here's the thing, those subpoenas backfired, because one of those creators didn't just fight back, they came prepared with documentation, communications, screenshots, and a full timeline that painted a very different story, one that prosecutors in a related case are now allegedly reviewing closely. And Starscope has confirmed that this documentation includes not just internal messages but time-stamped evidence suggesting premeditated targeting of dissenting voices, not for defamation, not for falsehoods, but for daring to speak the truth out loud. And the implications of that cannot be overstated, because once a judge sees intent, once a court identifies patterns, suddenly everything else becomes admissible, everything else becomes part of the case. And that's exactly what happened on Monday morning when Justin Baldoni's legal team filed a formal motion to introduce these new records into evidence, citing, quote, a coordinated effort to use legal intimidation to control public narrative and suppress material facts, unquote. And within minutes of that filing, observers inside the courtroom said the mood shifted, the energy changed, and suddenly the quiet confidence on Blake's side evaporated, because now it wasn't just about defending a claim, it was about defending credibility itself. And let's be honest, in Hollywood, reputation is currency. Once it's gone, rebuilding becomes nearly impossible, especially when that damage is caused by your own team. Insiders say the moment Baldoni's attorney laid out their argument, he didn't hold back. In fact, he reportedly told the court that what they had uncovered was not just an effort to protect a celebrity's image, but a campaign that weaponized the legal system in ways that should concern every journalist, every content creator, and every citizen paying attention to this trial. And while the courtroom remained sealed for portions of that hearing, sources inside say the evidence was so compelling that even opposing counsel appeared visibly shaken. This wasn't some tabloid rumor or unverified claim. This was real, documented evidence presented under oath. And the fallout is only beginning to take shape, because almost immediately Starscope learned that a major entertainment law firm that previously worked with Lively's team had pulled out of negotiations involving future public relations litigation. They haven't issued a public statement yet, but 2 attorneys from that firm have quietly updated their LinkedIn profiles and removed any reference to current entertainment litigation. And that silence speaks volumes. It confirms that whatever was uncovered behind closed doors was enough to rattle the very foundation of this legal effort. And then came the twist no one expected, because while Blake's legal team scrambled to respond and push back against the motion, Scope received exclusive information that a separate federal inquiry has now opened into whether any improper communications occurred between members of her legal team and digital media platforms regarding the removal or suppression of certain content surrounding the case, and if that proves true, we're not just talking about a civil problem. Anymore, we're talking about a potential violation of federal communication laws and manipulation of public access to legal information, and that kind of thing doesn't just vanish with a well-crafted press release or a carefully managed appearance. It sticks, it spreads, and it destroys the very brand Hollywood once adored, because when public trust collapses, especially under the weight of exposed deception, there's no easy comeback, no red carpet that can distract from the truth, and now we're seeing the beginning of that collapse, because for the first time since this legal war began, multiple public figures who had previously voiced support for Lively have now gone silent. Some have archived past posts, others have issued vague statements about fairness and due process, but none have reaffirmed their support. And when Starscope reached out to their reps, we were met with a wall of no comment and media blackouts, which only confirms what's really happening behind the scenes. People are distancing themselves, and they're doing it fast, and in the world of entertainment, that kind of silence is deafening because it tells you exactly what's coming next. And if this trajectory continues, we may soon see sponsors pulling out, projects being quietly shelved, and partnerships being reconsidered entirely. And for someone like Blake Lively, whose entire image has been built on relatability, elegance, and controlled narratives, this kind of disruption is devastating. And make no mistake, it's only going to get worse from here, because Justin Baldoni's legal team isn't slowing down. Insiders confirm they're preparing a second wave of motions, including a request for full discovery into all communications between Lively's camp and third-party content moderation firms, and depending on what those records reveal, we could be looking at one of the biggest transparency cases in entertainment law history. And for Starscope, this isn't just a story, it's a reckoning, because what we're witnessing isn't just legal drama. It's a clash between power and principle, between image and integrity, and the truth always finds its way through, no matter how deep it's buried, no matter how many lawyers try to keep it hidden. And as we prepare for part 3, the question isn't whether Blake can recover from this. The real question is how much worse it's going to get before the full truth comes out. And just when the dust seemed to settle and the courtroom buzz had begun to quiet down, Blake Lively made a move so audacious, so reckless, that even her own supporters were left stunned, because Starscope has just uncovered a wave of confidential communications, court memos, and unheard witness responses that point to one single truth: Blake's legal team is no longer just playing defense, they're trying to erase the board completely behind closed doors. Our sources tell us Blake's attorney authorized a last-ditch effort to suppress damaging evidence from being admitted, a move that bypassed routine procedure and raised serious ethical red flags. The kind of move that puts a career in jeopardy. And when this was challenged by the opposing counsel led by Justin Baldoni's side, what followed was nothing short of explosive. We're talking about emails that were marked confidential suddenly being handed over to the court, not by Blake's team, but by a third-party source, someone close to the initial smear campaign, someone who had clearly turned. And the moment those files hit the court record, the judge's tone changed noticeably. According to inside observers, the bench shifted from neutral to visibly irritated. And not just with the documents, but with the manner in which Blake's team tried to avoid them. Now, here's where things take a darker turn, because in those documents there are 10 stamped correspondences indicating strategic coordination between publicists, legal aides, and at least one media outlet, all centered around shaping public narrative during the height of Blake's defamation controversy. And the emails weren't old, they were recent, meaning Blake's camp may have been actively shaping stories even as she was under oath swearing to transparency. And when Baldoni's lawyer presented this to the court, along with metadata confirming dates and file origins, the silence in the courtroom was described as suffocating. Sources tell Starscope that the judge requested a private sidebar with both legal teams shortly after. And while we can't confirm what was said inside that conference, we do know that Blake's attorney walked out looking shaken, and for good reason, because within 48 hours a formal inquiry had been initiated into possible obstruction of justice and perjury. What's more, this inquiry is not being led by anyone on the Baldoni side. It's being spearheaded by a neutral judicial ethics panel, which means this isn't just about Blake's civil case anymore. This is about whether legal misconduct occurred in the course of sworn testimony. And now the question is whether Blake Lively will be called back to court, not just to defend herself, but to explain herself under oath again. This Time with less room to maneuver and far fewer allies at her side, but it gets worse because the moment this inquiry was confirmed, public sentiment began to shift. Online creators who were once hesitant to speak out started uploading side-by-side breakdowns of Blake's past interviews. Compared with current court filings, some of those contradictions are jaw-dropping. One YouTuber even overlaid her 2023 red carpet interview with a timeline of when specific defamatory posts allegedly originated from accounts linked to her PR network, and the match was undeniable. The timestamps lined up, the phrasing was eerily similar, and Blake's claim that she was completely unaware started to collapse under scrutiny. What's more, that same creator shared screenshots of anonymous DMs from someone who had once worked in a digital agency reportedly contracted by Blake's team. Those DMs suggested that creators were being flagged for takedown not because of misinformation, but because they were inconvenient, and now that testimony could be subpoenaed too. It's like watching a dam break, slow at first then all at once. And while Blake's social media accounts remain silent, Starscope has confirmed that several of her brand deals are on hold pending the outcome of this inquiry, and that's a consequence money can't hide. Blake Lively is not just facing reputational damage, she's watching her entire public image get cross-examined in real time, and her team knows it. The courtroom is no longer her stage, it's her reckoning. What was once elegant damage control has turned into panic. PR, the kind where every move is overcalculated and none of it works. The more she tries to control the story, the more the story spins out of her hands, and behind all of this is one devastating realization. The truth doesn't need a microphone, it only needs a moment, and that moment has arrived. Creators are documenting timelines with precision, lawyers are filing motions in real time. The judge has signaled he's not in the mood for games, and viewers everywhere are waking up to how deep this rabbit hole actually goes. And Starscope will not back down, because in the end, this is no longer just about legal filings and clever counters. This is about accountability on a scale that Hollywood rarely sees, and as the inquiry unfolds with new filings expected in the next 72 hours, we will be here documenting, exposing, connecting the dots that Blake never wanted connected because her tactics were meant to silence, but the silence has shattered. And now it's Blake who can't stop the noise, and just when we thought the chaos couldn't spiral any further, Blake Lively's inner circle made a choice that will likely haunt them for years to come, because Starscope has just confirmed through sealed court memos and newly surfaced whistleblower testimonies that Blake's team didn't just attempt to suppress evidence, they actively sought to intimidate a key digital witness, a move so reckless, so dangerously transparent that even longtime Hollywood fixers are calling it an unforced error. And here's the terrifying part, the target wasn't some anonymous Twitter account or fringe commentator, it was a mid-level platform moderator who had access to internal logs from a major social media company, and those logs held receipts, usernames, IP trails, and backdoor edits tied directly to Blake's known PR infrastructure. That moderator was quietly cooperating with the court through a confidential subpoena issued weeks ago, but when Blake's legal apparatus caught wind of it all, hell broke loose. According to leaked affidavits, the moderator began receiving anonymous messages that escalated from vague concerns about their professional future to direct threats about legal consequences if they disclosed sensitive client-side data. And those messages were traced to an encrypted relay server tied to an LA-based legal consulting firm, one that has a well-documented history of working with Blake's former crisis advisor. Now here's the twist, this move backfired catastrophically, because not only did the intimidation attempt fail, it triggered a second court action, this time a protective order and a full evidentiary hearing on whether witness. And just when it seemed like the dust might finally settle, when the court silence felt like a calm before something bigger, Blake Lively shattered that illusion with one more miscalculated blow that spiraled the entire case into an irreversible public spectacle, because the desperation had already begun to seep into every move her legal team made. And this time, the consequences were not just legal, they were cultural, social, career-altering, because by now even the most cautious voices in the industry began asking what Starscope had been saying from day one, that this was not just about a smear campaign or a misused subpoena, but about power, about privilege, about how far someone was willing to go to silence creators who asked the Kenna, but about power, about privilege, about how far someone was willing to go to silence. Someone was willing to go to silence creators who asked the Kennas who asked wrong questions. And in this final chapter of an already chaotic legal storm, we saw Blake do something no one expected. She filed a last-minute motion to seal not just her communication records, but to retroactively block commentary content tied kept her case under what her lawyers called reputational risk protocols, which even the judge questioned on the grounds of freedom of press and public right to know, and yet the motion itself told the world exactly how much she feared the narrative slipping from her control, and Starscope was among the first named directly in the filing, an ironic twist considering it was Blake's own choices that amplified the story into the stratosphere. And while the public fixated on the court drama, what slipped through quietly was perhaps more damaging than all the headlines. Combined, a key witness in Justin Baldoni's corner came forward not under pressure, but voluntarily delivering a full affidavit detailing how Blake's team allegedly weaponized false flag reporting, used burner social media accounts, and even reached out to third-party PR agents to intentionally craft counter-narratives against YouTubers, raising valid legal concerns. And while the affidavit hasn't been fully dissected in court yet, its release alone shifted the perception in a seismic way. No longer was this a celebrity versus a rumor, it had become a celebrity versus accountability narrative, and in that space, Blake seemed lost, unfamiliar with the world where her words were no longer taken as truth by default, where Starscope and others were being vindicated, not just by views but by evidence. And in a poetic collapse, the same press that once celebrated her image began echoing the very clips she wanted taken down, replaying her contradictions, analyzing her courtroom demeanor, questioning her ethics. And through it all, one fact remained inescapable: the truth didn't need to shout, it just needed time. And the truth came out slowly, methodically, painfully but completely. And now Blake Lively stands at a crossroads. Her legal battle is far from over, her reputation fractured, her industry alliances thinning, and her grip on the narrative slipping every day as creators everywhere feel empowered, not silenced by this ordeal. And Starscope remains committed not to vengeance, not to gossip, but to truth, to telling the stories others are too afraid to touch. And as the final court date looms, the question is no longer whether Blake will win. It's whether she can survive what she started, because this wasn't a case about Justin Baldoni or a single subpoena. It was about what happens when someone famous believes the world owes them silence, and what happens when that silence finally breaks. And when it breaks publicly, legally, irrevocably, there's no coming back from that. Not in court, not in Hollywood, not anywhere. Because now her moves are documented, her lies disproven, her tactics exposed, and her future uncertain. And if there's one thing we've learned, it's this: the truth always catches up, no matter how famous you are, and when it does, it doesn't whisper, it roars.